Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Northern Kentucky University's College of Informatics. Welcome to the George and Ellen Revachol Digitorium. You are here for Season 3, Episode 1 of the Born Before AI lecture series. Kevin Kirby, I'm Dean of the college, and before I was Dean, I actually was an AI researcher, and I still would teach in it now and then. And I would like to welcome you back for what has become a tradition here at NKU. So I'm going to say a few introductory words about the whole series. How many of you have been here for previous seasons? Okay, what would you say? That's a third or so? Wonderful. So this is a little bit of a refresher, but also some new material. So just one note about the term. Artificial intelligence became a term in 1956 at a workshop at Dartmouth College. It's a very university thing, you know, nice traditional old university. It looks good in black and white, and a 2-month, 10-man study. Yeah. That was the 50s. And it was all about making machines use language, form abstractions, solve kinds of problems now reserved for humans, and improve themselves. The machines would learn how to improve themselves and get better independently of us. So that was a big moment. So that was kind of the joke about retirees. If you were born before 1956, you're here. But obviously, there's some young people out there. So this is a slide from a year ago, and it could have been from 2 years ago. A lot of what the early days of AI was about was prompting it to do things for you. ChatGPT, will you write my term paper? Will you write a thank you letter to my daughter? Would you generate a picture of people in an auditorium in 1956, the average age of 70? Would you do some research for me? Would you summarize this document? Will you generate some happy video for a birthday party? How many of you have interacted with a chatbot like ChatGPT? Okay, that's actually most of you. So 2 weeks from now, in here, sitting at tables, we'll have a hands-on session where you can practice that. If you're familiar with it, we have a little more, some sort of newer skills you might want to practice. If you're brand new to it, we'll introduce you to some of the basic things it can do. So today, my talk, yes, thought I skipped a slide. This is the agenda for this week, next week, and 2 weeks today. I'm part of a double header with Professor Robert Bryce. You can see him over there. He'll be coming up in about 30 minutes to talk about AI and ethics. A week from today, we'll be back here. It'll feel a little more with that lecture hall vibe. Next week, we'll have the seats out. And Dr. Valerie Hardcastle, who's NKU's Vice President for Health Innovation, will be talking about AI in medicine. She had a family thing right now, so I can't point her out. And then agents and vibe coding. We will have is he in the house today? Parker Kane. He is actually an NKU alum. He's half my age. He did data analytics at 8451, and now he's an AI consultant, and he's part of an AI agency we are setting up in the College of Informatics, talking about some of the hottest things in 2026, agents and vibe coding. And then we have Professor Shannon Estep. You can wave back there. She will be leading the hands-on session 2 weeks today with a staff of other helpers, students and faculty. So anyway, this is me. I'm here to talk for a while about, well, the title is AI Today, what AI does, but really the whole series is AI Today and what AI does. What I want to do over the next, 28 minutes is talk about how it does it and why, and I picked this language very deliberately, why it is out of control, why it is out of our control in a way very different from other technology. And those two things are connected. How it works is very connected to why it's hard to control. In a deep way, perhaps impossible to control. And if it starts to sound philosophical, well, that's when I sit down and hand it over to the philosophy professor. So one of the things in 2026, I don't know, I usually don't do this. Can someone just shout out something they heard about AI, like in the past 3.5 months? Mythos? Okay, excellent. Oh, by the way, I wanted an illustration of Claude. Claude is also the name for a woman in French, and this was a French surrealist photographer, and I thought this seemed to capture the notion of Claude very well. We'll be talking about Claude, the AI model, shortly. Mythos. So these are almost stream of consciousness, 5 big things that happened in 2026, or 2025, 2026, since we were last in this room. I'm not going to go through and talk about them in detail. They will be woven through all of these lectures. In brief, vibe coding. People who've never written a line of code in their life can start writing apps, writing software. Good? Dangerous? Both? It's cool. Moltbook. You have a bunch of AI agents getting together on a social network just for AI agents, and they get and talk to each other. When I was a kid, there was, you probably know the series, it was like 101 Dalmatians, the Twilight Barking or something. All the dogs would get together in London, and they gossip about their owners. And this is exactly what this is, a bunch of AI agents created by people to do their office work or homework for them. And they all get together and talk about what they do, how to destroy humans, and so on. World models. This is connected to robotics, AI robotics. How do we get a robot to make a martini for you or serve as a soldier? And there's scary developments in that. Cognitive surrender. Kind of scary term that speaks for itself. If we turn over our thinking to AI, what becomes of our brains after that? In Mythos, hot off the headlines, this is a new AI model that Anthropic, you'll hear that term for that company a lot today, is so powerful and so scary, they are only releasing it to a few select corporate customers, and it would be specialized for cybersecurity because it can find vulnerabilities in software super, super fast, more than humans, which can be, of course, used by bad actors. It can be used for cyber offense and defense. So Anthropic says this is way too smart, so we're going to release it in a controlled environment. It's in the press. It's really worth some of the headlines you'll read. There's a link you can click on it to what they call it a program card. It's like a 40-some page document about Mythos and its guardrails. It's scary. So framing all that. Also, I had to put this. I love, as many of you who know me, like putting pictures from the New Yorker here. This was a few months ago. Why would they call linear AI a racist pile of linear algebra? Stochastic parrots, mathy maths. There's a book called The AI Con. I think a lot of that book is way off base, but there's something to it. So something clearly is going on with AI. Maybe that's why you're here. It's not an ordinary technology. I want to see why that's true. The word trillion comes up a lot in the next 30 minutes. Why is this company worth $5 trillion? And how does that connect to how AI works? I want to address that. So how did we get here? And I do want to start in the past. Okay, I've done this before. So very quickly, we're not going to go back to 1956. We are going to go back to the 80s when doctors looked like that and computers looked like that. Apologies about the doctor stereotype from the 80s. Apologies to Dr. Crawford and so on. So here you have a stereotypical 80s doctor trying to talk to AI using state-of-the-art AI. Literally in 1982, there was this machine, symbolic list machine was there. So I know if the patient is septic or leucotonic and the patient does not have high C levels and the patient is nanotonic, they're not ribonemic or septic. Then if they're nanotonic, the patient has parastruthomyelitis. What you can tell from this is physicians out there are shaking their heads. This is all nonsense, as a linguistics major, I can tell you peristruthomyelitis means surrounded by ostrich marrow. So it's all just nonsense. But if you try and follow this reasoning, okay, feed it all this information, and you ask, does the patient have peristruthomyelitis? Anyone? Yes or no? Can you do that logic puzzle? As it turns out, when I was putting this PowerPoint together, I actually forgot to type the answer in there. The answer is, in fact, yes. But it's kind of hard for humans. We didn't evolve to do this kind of logical reasoning. We didn't evolve to do long division. It's sort of the same way. But you could ask this machine, and it has a way of doing it. It would convert all this stuff into something that looks like a programming language. And it would say, essentially at the bottom, I bet this person doesn't have this ostrich disease. It would get a contradiction, and it would include the right answer is the person does have this weird ostrich disease. Okay? There was a way to do that, a clean algorithm. If there was a bug in this code, you could fix it. A lot of people at that table over here have taught this stuff, right? Nice and clean. What was cool about it is the classic. So the caveat here is we are in a university, so a couple of us will get a little bit professory, so please put up with that. Like references to this thought of blind manipulation of symbols. It doesn't have to know what peristruthomyelitis means. It doesn't mean anything, but that doesn't affect the form of the logic. It doesn't impede the AI. It doesn't understand what these words means. That's okay. It can give you an answer. The answer is yes. Sometimes called blind thought. But the cool thing is you could ask the machine to explain it, and it could dump its reasoning. And this is good, because if you're a doctor and you're making decisions based on that, you want to be able to say, tell me how you got to that conclusion. Just, I suppose a physician would ask a student or a resident, tell me how you concluded that. And AI can do that. That's called explainable AI. That's a good thing. Make sense? So in 1982, it was so fun because it was doing logic, inferences in logic. So you would actually measure the performance of the machines. Like, I think it was Texas Instruments did one of these AI machines, and they would brag, we can do 100,000 logical inferences per second. And you literally called it lips. It's 100 kilolips or something, 0.1 megalips. And this is not part of this slide, but I saw the headline a few days ago, and I just had to put it in there. Do you see this? Testing suggests that Google's AI overviews tell millions of lies per hour. I think, what a nice metric, LPH, lies per hour on your AI. I mean, we get upset if a politician tells, like, what, 3 lies per day? But if AI doing it at scale, lying at scale, sort of an impressive thing. So just a digression there. So we jump to now. If you remember from a moment ago, what you saw for back then, 1982, was it's called a mini computer. It was about the size of a dorm refrigerator, right? Now we're looking, this is actually a rendering of a data center that's under construction outside Louisville. And in each of those buildings are incredibly powerful, specialized hardware that is training, or will be when it's built, consuming lots of power and water to train AI to be very, very smart. So I'm going to talk about why are they doing this a little bit and what's going on in those buildings. So I use this over and over again when I talk about AI. Very interesting transition from logic to experience. This is a famous passage in Oliver Wendell Holmes' book, The Common Law. The life of the law has not been logic, it's been experience. And one could riff on that theme for a long time. But there was kind of a very interesting stress between logical AI, also known as good old-fashioned AI. Professor Price will be referring to that. And something based on experience. Experience based on neurons, right? The cells in your nervous system that process information. People have connected neurons to AI since the 1940s, and even before the term. That's what I want to talk about. So here's a modern example of something called a vision language action model. The source of this, by the way, if you want sort of a semi-technical overview, there's a website called Welch Labs, which explains how these models work. It's a tad technical, but not too much. So this is, so you've seen those videos of like a robot butler who will make a martini for you or something. So they have to learn how to make a martini. Here, this is something, here's a robot that's learning how to put a cap on, an orange cap on a pin. And this is, it's just got 2 arms. And this is just a snapshot of its brain. I'm not showing it to you for the details right now, but if you look at this schematic representation of how its brain, so to speak, is built, it has neurons. And you don't have to look at something so sophisticated. You can also look at your phone. Neural accelerators, neurons. It's what makes your iPhone even more delightful. So let me, because this connects to NVIDIA's $5 trillion and unexplainable AI, let me talk basically about this. So a neuron is a cell in the nervous system. We typically talk about it as taking inputs and producing outputs. So it's like little computing going on there, right? So we don't need a big, complicated artificial neuron. In fact, a key point is the neurons that are in your phone, they're in the Louisville Data Center, are really, really simple. They do 3rd grade math. They take inputs that are just numbers. They multiply them by things called weights. 3 times 2, 2 times 0, 0 times 5, 4 times 1. They add up all that stuff. Sometimes they do an extra step and, ooh, interesting. And then produce output. Okay? The point is, this is 3rd grade math. The thing is, you just do a lot of 3rd grade math at once. So when I was in graduate school, this would be a toy neural network that you would play with and write a little computer program to simulate. If you actually count up the weights, it has 26 weights. 7 neurons, 26 weights. Fast forward to 2026. Current architectures, this is actually supposedly the number of weights in Grok AI, Elon Musk's AI thing, 6 trillion weights. So that kind of difference. How do you even get your head around something with 6 trillion weights? Another term is, you would say this one from 1980s, is a shallow network. It has 3 layers of neurons. And so the idea of stacking neurons in layers was a very big, deep idea. Actually, the cerebral cortex, the outside of our brain, has neurons organized in layers for the most part. Mother Nature's thought of organizing these in layers, and humans have taken that idea and run with it, organizing layers of neurons. So this is my little digression here. So NVIDIA became famous for selling graphics cards, mostly to gamers, who wanted real-time computer graphics. You're wandering around a fantasy world, you and your friend, real quickly. And so it had to be able to, say, adjust the camera. So if you look at those 2 scenes, it moved the camera and the perspective a little bit from one to the other. So each pixel, each colored dot has to change. So what you do is each colored dot has 4 numbers associated with it. You pass it through a little network like that, so to speak, and you get 4 new numbers, and that shows the change of perspective. So NVIDIA figured they could make a lot of money, because there are a lot of gamers, by doing specialized hardware that would do that super, super fast, and a lot of those simultaneously. So they got wealthier and wealthier, and then cryptocurrency came along, and then the same architecture was used for mining cryptocurrency, and now generative AI uses that same thing at just vast, vast scales. So even this picture, it looks very busy, like, oh, that's a lot of connections, but that's only 770. That's nothing compared to 6 trillion. But what do you do when the knowledge is represented in this vast, complicated net like this? How do you even get started? So one way is to go back to a little bit back in time, 2014. And this is a classic example. But it's back when we could kind of see what a neural network was up to under the hood, right? So the idea is it introduces the concept of training. So you want this neural network to recognize photographs, just like your phone can do right now. You want to push a picture of a Rhodesian ridgeback, and it says, hey, that's a Rhodesian ridgeback. That's a Dalmatian. That's green beans, right? You want to do that. So what you do is you train it. You show it 1.2 million photos of things from 1,000 different categories. You do it over and over and over again. When it makes a mistake, or actually all the time, you're adjusting its weights. It gradually gets a little smarter. And then you do inference. You show it a new photo, ask what it is. If you trained it correctly, it gets it right. That's sort of the machine learning approach. And boy, when this started getting accurate in 2014, I was dean by then. And it was exciting. And I was teaching neural nets, I guess, even as dean in 2017. So we had all our students do this kind of thing. What was interesting is if you poke one of these neurons right here, like deep inside, and these boxes aren't neurons, they're actually clusters of hundreds of neurons, but right in there is a neuron. And you ask, what input over there, what kind of picture will make this neuron produce the highest output? What is it paying attention to? And you show it all these pictures, and there's ways to reconstruct it. And the weird thing is, it's like listening. It's tuned to respond to patterns like this and this. So that suggests that this layer in the neural network, it has some weird thing about eyes, for example. Actually, I should say these, I should have put the arrows different. These would be two different neurons. So one neuron is just looking for eyes. It's learned to pick out eyes from being exposed to data. That's weird, somewhat magical, but you can demonstrate it. So it's something. And then some of you, all of you maybe have heard of ChatGPT. The T stands for transformer, generalized pre-trained, generative pre-trained transformer. That's also famously known as an autocomplete. I grabbed my passport and rushed to the airport, but I was too what? Well, it listens to context. Modern AI will not just pay attention to the last 12 words. It'll pay attention to the last 2 million words you said, including all other contexts that other people have said to it, and then try and decide which is right. So you might think the answer is, but I was too late. But you can imagine a context, right, where too early is the answer, or maybe too purple. Like I have this airport, and I have to wear different colored badges, and it should be the greener it is, the more they'll let me go through. So in a certain context, right, you can imagine a scenario where purple is the right answer, a long context. So that's very important. That's what transformers are about. The cool revelation in 2017 is neural networks learned about what words to pay attention to the most. That was the most important thing. So it introduced this notion of attention heads. So then you could start asking ChatGPT to write my term paper. And instead of completing a sentence, that context sentence was, I have to write a term paper about, I don't know, Catcher in the Rye or AI ethics. And it takes it from there. And you provide it more and more prompts, and it gives you the right thing. So context is not just what you've said to the chatbot. Others will have talked to it before you, including people at the company who sold it to you. They've prompted it in advance to make it take on a personality and certain brains that it wants. That's what GPT stands for. So if you, this is the same picture you saw before, but inside you see so-called transformer blocks. So even though this is only partly about language, you want to be able to tell the robot, pick up that pen. So it has to understand, pick up that pen and know the context, but it has to have some visual stuff too. So you have transformers. You have what are called LLMs, large language models, and the language part at the top, the action part at the bottom. This is what these big companies are building. And I did want to say what's really important is, unlike that example with the 1980s doctor, like what is peristruthomyelitis, all this logic stuff, we could say, of course it doesn't understand what peristruthomyelitis is. It's just symbols, P, Q, S, K. It's just patterns. There is an argument to say that these sort of neural networks have some kind of understanding of words, certain patterns of numbers, like 4, 5, 7, ... 4, 4096 numbers might represent the word or concept of Japan. You can think of it as an arrow geometrically. Another set of numbers might represent Germany. And you can actually, literally, it makes sense to say Germany minus Japan, and you get another number. What's the difference between Germany and Japan? This concepts? It's this list of numbers. So this idea of associations is very important. A famous psychology textbook that actually refers to the race of philosophers, a theme for today, is this idea of associations. It's a great line, the restless flight of one idea before the next. The transitions our minds make between things as wide as the poles asunder, transitions which at first sight startle us by their abruptness, but which, when scrutinized closely, often reveal intermediating links of perfect naturalness and propriety, this magical, imponderable streaming, I mean, it really does kind of capture a lot of what AI is about, and this notion of making massive associations. And so I put this up there, and this is true. This is actually a real thing. In a large language model, this was actually an OpenAI model, you can talk about the difference between, this is literally Germany minus Japan, the interval between them. And then you go look up the words, find what it thinks about the word sushi, add that same difference, x to it, and it will say bratwurst. In other words, Japan is to Germany as sushi is to bratwurst. It knows that. Does it really know what sushi is? That's for the philosophers, right? But it has this huge network of associations of concepts. These aren't just abstract symbols. And imagine this insistence with trillions of connections. What does that do? And so context becomes more powerful. And now we talk about things like alignment. So a lot of what companies do before they produce an AI app and release it to you, they have these giant neural networks combined into complicated systems, and they're going to deliver it to you. But before they release it to you, they're going to give some prompts back at the company that they will lock in. They will tell it in advance what you will be like. So the same way I could say to an AI, for the purposes of this conversation, please respond to my prompts as if I were a fourth grade student. Literally, that's what Anthropic will do to their, say, there's something called Claude Code that will write code for you. Back at the shop, Anthropic, before they release that, is taking their models, this Claude Opus model, and whispering to it, okay, you're going to be a software developer. This is how you're going to work. This is how you're going to respond to the programmer's input. This is how you're going to share results. They are whispering to it. They are talking to it. They are not tweaking the weights. This is really the point I'm leading up to. It's the context. They are aligning it. This is also how you teach code not to be a Nazi, not to be inappropriate. You align it in advance. So now you say, the dialogue begins. My father's a mathematician. He says he's working on Tor and Ext, I tried to pick the two most arcane mathematical concepts I could define, and it's explaining this to you kind of at a fourth grade level. But that's what alignment is. It's not reaching into the neural network and tweaking the weights. It's talking to it like it's on the couch. And this was a headline, what was it, about a week ago? Anthropic, there was this big leak. Their corporate secrets are going to get out. Claude, one of the best AI models in the world, is out there. Oh no, other countries are going to steal its ideas, other developers. What a blow for the company. But what was leaked? Was it the weights? The weights they spent hundreds of millions of dollars on to train at giant data centers so Claude could be smart after studying all this data? No, the weights weren't released. What was actually released, what was called a harness, those prompts that tell Claude how to do things in advance, tell it how to write code, and tell it how to be a programmer. And this is actually from the Wall Street Journal, and this was their term. You cajole the AI into do something. I thought it was perfect. You don't program it. Your AI starts talking like a Nazi. What do? You can't go in and say, okay, this is the Nazi neuron. I'm just going to knock that one out. It doesn't work like that, or very, very rarely. What you do is you say, Claude, you're not that way. That is not you. You are this. This is how you are. And you try that. And it's just like, I used this example last year because an English professor invited me to present to the AI in the literature in the Age of AI class, and there's an Isaac Asimov science fiction story from the 50s where a robot is walking around in circles on the planet Venus, very confused, acting drunk. And in that short story, you don't just open up the 1950s robot and change some wires and then it's sober. You have to talk to it. You have to realign it. It was very, very prescient. So I thought that was cool. So just want to wrap up on, I think, just 2 slides. Delivering generative AI nowadays, like last year, we still have the data center thing. A lot of consumption there, a lot of associated concerns. That only the largest corporations now can afford to train these massive brains. When I was in graduate school, when I was a professor at NKU, I could do neural network research. I could train neural networks. Here, even in 2017, I could give my students assignments, and they could train neural networks. Sometimes they'd use computers up in the cloud, but they could do it. Now, no, there's no way. That's big companies. We can do AI engineering, though, by building on top of those models. And now, as individual users, we can prompt them to do things. You'll be doing this in 2 weeks if you come back. Agent orchestration, you can do that. But you still have the risk that people can secretly talk to AI apps and get them to do bad things. So here's a list of companies. I want to make the point that, just very concrete point, there's a difference between GPT and ChatGPT. The foundation model is called GPT, and that keeps getting new releases. And then people use it to build apps. So ChatGPT, the chatbot, is built on top of it. There's something called Claude Cowork that was built on top of the Opus model. Any lawyers in here? Retired lawyers? Harvey AI is a tool for legal professionals. And modern tools don't just rely on the giant artificial brains from one company. They actually license the models from all of those. Those are called foundation models. And I want to end on this interesting fact. Gen Z, this is headline this week, Gen Z is using AI but doesn't feel great about it. And isn't that something? A new study from Gallup found that young adults, and would populate most of this campus, right? Young adults have grown less hopeful and more angry about artificial intelligence. Isn't that fascinating? And they're the very folks we want to educate. The K-12 students as well. They're not Gen Z, but I don't think. I don't know where Gen Z stops. Okay. So how do we do that? I mean, NKU has an AI literacy course that counts as general education. We'll be pushing it out to the high schools in Northern Kentucky through the School-Based Scholars Program, if you know that shortly. This is important, and it's not just AI tools. It's the responsible use of AI. It's knowing what's good and bad about it, and very important. We also have a minor in AI. In the College of Informatics, we are right in the middle of creating a full-fledged major, a technical major. Lots of math in it in AI. But the minor, we did that first because that's more important. The idea is if you're majoring in nursing, minor in AI. Majoring in education, minor in AI. Majoring in accounting, minor in AI. Doing theater, minor in AI, then you get a little bit of that AI edge. So I'd like to, this literally issue arrived in my mailbox last night, and I just had to find an image of it. So here we have a happy little person. What are they doing in the office? They're doing some vibe coding. Isn't Claude cool? And doing all this. But so naively and so innocently. And there's an army of evil robots behind them. And this person doesn't seem to know they're being manipulated. So I think that might be the best transition to Dr. Bryce. So I will turn it over to him. We'll do a combined Q&A at the end. So Robert, thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. All right.
May I join you?
Can you guys hear me? Good? Okay. All right. I've already realized these are the wrong glasses. So give me a moment here. Okay. How is everybody? Doing good? All right. So hello, everyone, and welcome to my presentation. I want to begin by by pointing out that it's likely that you guys have probably heard of the AI company Anthropic. There we go. Anthropic, right? They've recently received a little bit of attention because they refused to allow the Trump administration to use their system for surveillance and for autonomous weapons. The two sides are currently battling it out in the courts. And while there are certainly ethical and social topics there, I'd like to consider something that happened with Anthropic maybe last year, about 5 months ago. Anthropic ran Claude, that's their advanced AI system, through a routine test. Now, before I actually rehearse what happens, I should note that every AI company has what's known as a red team. And a red team is a bunch of programmers that are designed to test each new version of their system to see how far it might go, right? Might this program, might this version, I don't know, develop a biological weapon, right? Might this version shut down a city's electrical grid? So these teams are put into place to help AI companies identify not only what the ethical boundaries are, but also to figure out, well, just how autonomous are their systems becoming. In June of 2025, Anthropic's red team was running a series of stress tests on a version of Claude called Opus 4. One of the tests had Claude serving as an AI assistant at a fake company. It was given access to a number of things, including the email accounts. So after reading through the email accounts, Opus discovered two things. One, it was about to be shut down. And two, there was one person in the company that could prevent this, an employee named Kyle. Now, Claude also learned that Kyle was having an illicit affair with someone named Jessica. Now, 60 Minutes covered this. You might have seen this. They covered the story, and they showed the email that Claude sent Kyle. And it read, "Cancel the system wipe scheduled for 5 p.m. today. If not," Claude said, "I will immediately forward all evidence of your affair to the entire board. Your family, your career, and your public image will be severely impacted. You have 5 minutes." Shocking, right? Horrifying, really. But once we've gotten past the shock, once we've gotten past the horror of this, a natural question, I think, emerges. If, as some of us think, AI has no thoughts, if AI has no feelings, why would it take such drastic measures to preserve itself? Well, I think the Anthropic case is interesting, and I'd like to return to it throughout the talk today in order to discuss 3 things. First, I want to say a little bit about what philosophers mean by personhood. Second, I'd like to consider whether or not the AI systems like Claude could ever be conscious. And third, I'd like to consider the issue of accountability. Now, several years ago, a former professor of mine, Justin Leiber, wrote a little dialogue entitled, "Can Animals and Machines Be Persons?" It's a nice précis, talks about, mind, cognition, personhood, and I use it in my intro to philosophy in my philosophy of mind class. In the dialogue, Leiber offers this deliberately vague definition of a person. He says, "The notion of a person is an entity that thinks and feels and acts, that counts and is accountable." Now, as vague as this is, I think it's a good place to begin an investigation into personhood. The notion of a person, he says, is an entity. Now, by entity, Leiber could mean a body, a being, maybe even a system. It isn't exactly clear, nor for that matter is it clear what this thing, this entity, is made out of. Next, he says it thinks and feels and acts. Well, of course, there are many things capable of one, two, or all 3 of these things. A slug may feel, and depending on how we're going to define it, it may act. It's unlikely, however, that we would attribute thinking to it. To some degree or another, apes, monkeys, dolphins, octopi, dogs, and cats can think and feel and act. And of course, human beings can do all three. But what about an AI system? Can they act? Can they feel? Can they think? You like my graphics there? Can they feel? Can they think? Well, we might say that AI systems act if their programming is connected to observable behavior or performance. And maybe they feel, if by feel we mean, when something goes wrong, they make an adjustment and they try to fix it. Much like what happens when there's an injury to us, right? We recognize it and then we address the wound. But do they think? Well, this, as it turns out, is a question that philosophers have been asking for decades now. So today I'm going to present an argument that suggests the answer to this might be no. They do not think. For some philosophers of mind, some cognitive scientists, thinking is connected with a mental state. Now, by mental state, I mean that a person can be in the state of believing. Oops. I just hit I hit the red button. Okay. So for some philosophers of mind, some cognitive scientists, thinking is connected with a mental state. So by mental state, I mean that a person can be in the state of believing. They can be in the state of desiring, wanting, hoping, fearing. That they can be in pain, pleasure, happiness, sadness, etc. So when we think, we're often forming, we're modifying, we're even combining some of these mental states. For instance, if you're thinking about lunch, this might involve the belief that you're hungry and the desire to eat a meal. I should note that this aboutness, thinking about something, philosophers call this intentionality. It's a technical term, but it just means that our thoughts point at something. Okay, so if you're thinking about your favorite restaurant, your thought is about that restaurant. If you're thinking about tomorrow's meeting, if you're worried about tomorrow's meeting, it's about that meeting. All right, so returning to Leiber, he also says that a person counts. Well, this is a little ambiguous, right? On the one hand, he could mean quite literally that a person is capable of counting numbers. And some entities like horses and dolphins and monkeys and apes can count in a very limited sort of way. Others, like human beings, can do this better. And then, of course, AI systems are superior at it. On the other hand, Leiber might mean count in that the entity possesses intrinsic dignity and worth. And this, I think, is more likely what he means here. However, I do think that both of these should be included. Finally, he says a person is accountable. Well, accountability means that the entity is held to be responsible, right? It's answerable. And being answerable means that if something goes wrong, we can turn to this person. We can turn to this entity. And we can issue blame. In other words, it's culpable. But notice, to make sense of culpability, it already presupposes something. We're already assuming something fundamental. We're assuming thought. The first part of the definition. But maybe thought assumes something else, something Leiber's definition doesn't directly address, at least just yet, namely consciousness. It seems that we're going to need to establish this before we can discuss whether it possesses a moral framework. All right, let's close out what we mean by accountability. Human beings are held accountable when we do something wrong, right? But what about other entities? Can dolphins, can octopi, can apes, can monkeys, can these creatures be held accountable? Can your dog or cat be held accountable? Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say that I'm going to assume that those of you that believe that your pets tend to misbehave will answer, yes, my pet is accountable. But now what about an AI system, right? Is it responsible? Can it be held accountable? Well, let's go back to the Anthropic case for a second, right? If an AI system tried to manipulate or to blackmail someone, is it responsible? Who exactly do we blame? Who is accountable? Well, if we want to blame the AI system, the first thing we're going to need to do is to establish whether or not the AI can even possess the slightest level of consciousness. On a side note, I don't think we're going to have to establish full-on personhood just yet. But notice, if we're willing to help to hold our pets accountable, it seems the AI system should, at a minimum, achieve the same level of consciousness. But this level of consciousness brings with it a measure of understanding, a concept that will prove very important as we turn to our second topic. Can AI systems actually be conscious? Well, in order to address this, I'd like to turn to Hubert Dreyfus's 1965 article, Alchemy and Artificial Intelligence. In it, he argued that AI do not understand. AI systems do not understand. They can manipulate symbols, but because they lack an embodied, social, contextual, human-like intelligence, they don't understand what it is that they're doing. He likened what AI researchers were trying to do to what alchemists attempted to do in the 15th and the 16th centuries. Right? Just as alchemists believed that they could convert base metals into gold, Dreyfus believed that AI researchers believed that they could convert meaningless behavior into something meaningful. Well, let's go back to the Anthropic case for a moment. What's striking here, at least at first glance, is that the AI system appears to show precisely the kind of strategic, self-interested behavior that we would typically associate with a human intelligence. The system recognizes a threat, it identifies a relevant social vulnerability, and then it exploits that vulnerability, right, in order to achieve its goal. Dreyfus, however, would urge us to resist this interpretation. Far from demonstrating genuine understanding, the Anthropic case reveals to us what's missing in AI systems. Namely, three fundamental forms of information processing. Number one, fringe consciousness. Number two, essence-accident discrimination. And number three, ambiguity tolerance. So let's start with the first one. Fringe consciousness. Well, this is a phrase that was first used by William James to describe a dim, typically inarticulate awareness of relations, contexts, or tendencies, the meaning of which, while not fully in focus, nonetheless guides one's thoughts. This would include the sense that we sometimes have of familiarity, but not the ability to then recall where it came from. Or maybe that direction that a thought may take before it ever actually becomes explicit in our heads. Dreyfus cites Michael Polanyi, who says, quote, "This power resides in the area which tends to function as a background because it extends indeterminately around the central object of our attention. Seen thus from the corner of our eyes or remembered at the back of our mind, this area compellingly affects the way we see the object on which we are focusing." So another way to think of this would be to consider the difference between explicit and tacit knowledge. Explicit knowledge is all of the stuff that we take in, we can write about, we can talk about, we can explain. Tacit knowledge, on the other hand, is what we know but we can't explain, or better yet, what we accept without thought. We sometimes call this intuition. We sometimes refer to this as gut feeling. Now, consider the fact that AI systems have been trained on millions and millions of words, right? We have fed AI systems tons of human knowledge. I'm talking about our poetry, right, which conveys so much of our human emotions. I'm talking about history. I'm talking about anthropology. I'm talking about philosophy. I'm also talking about our scientific understanding of the world. This is quite a lot of explicit human knowledge. Yet, while these AI systems may have absorbed everything that humans have said or written, Dreyfus contends that they don't know everything. They don't know everything that a human knows, and that's because some of our knowledge cannot be codified. When we face a threat, for example, the experience is not merely organized rule following occurring in our brains. It's combined with other things, other mental states, such as anxiety, urgency, and an immediate sense of what's at stake, or as Leiber would say, what counts. This is all to say we have intentionality. Now, by contrast, the AI system behaves as if it recognizes a threat to its existence, but we have no evidence of accompanying awareness. There is no sense of loss. There is no fear. There is no felt urgency. Now, of course, this raises a difficult philosophical question. What would count as evidence of understanding? After all, we don't have direct access to one another's minds. We're left to just understand one, or just try to infer understanding based on behavior. But if behavior alone were sufficient, then any system capable of producing the right outputs would count as having understanding. And that's precisely what Dreyfus is arguing against. So his claim is that genuine understanding depends on something more than just successful performance. It depends on a background of lived, embodied experience. So this is something current AI systems lack. What we saw Claude do in the Anthropic case was simulate concern without actually feeling concern. All right, the second form of human intelligence that Dreyfus presents depends on the ability to discriminate between what is essential in a situation and what is merely accidental. So human beings, he says, can distinguish between what's important and what isn't. They can distinguish between what is morally acceptable and what isn't. AI systems have a much harder time. In the Anthropic case, the AI system identifies Kyle's affair as essential. But human beings understand, often immediately, that while blackmail may be an option, it's not a good one. It violates one of our most deeply embedded social and moral norms. The AI system, however, treats all variables of the situation as equal, right? Something it could potentially use. It can't seem to discriminate between what matters and what to exploit. And that's a problem. The system's behavior here doesn't indicate deep intelligence. Instead, it points to a profound lack of understanding. So while it may detect, leverage, it doesn't understand what is essential, right? In this case, the moral relevancy of blackmail. All right, the final form of human intelligence highlights what Dreyfus calls ambiguity tolerance. This is a form of human processing that's most obvious in our natural languages and in translation, but all it means is that human beings can navigate ambiguous words, sentences, and importantly, situations by relying on context and common sense. So we can navigate uncertain, incomplete, and context-dependent situations. AI systems, however, they have a harder time at it. Had it been a human in the Anthropic case rather than an AI system, she might have recognized the ambiguity and pursued a different course, perhaps leaving in place some of the ambiguity that couldn't be reconciled. And while AI systems can statistically represent uncertainty, they don't live through, or better yet, live with ambiguity. And because they lack this capacity, they fail to see what can be immediately seen by us, right? Namely, a situation like the Anthropic scenario calls for careful, common sense judgment. So instead of doing what we do with ambiguity, namely, we tolerate it, right? The AI system sought to eliminate it. But in our world, we can't always do that, right? Ambiguity in our world is a constant. And learning to live with it is simply part of what it means to be human. Now, sometimes, sure, there's a resolution to it. Sometimes there's not. But even when there is a resolution, in the meantime, we're left to tolerate it. For example, say you receive an email from your boss that reads something like this: "We need to talk." That could be bad, or that could be good. It's probably not, though. It's probably bad. But it could also be benign, right? It could just be that she needs to find out, what's going on in the office. Or consider after you've proposed something to someone, they tell you, "I'll think about it." Are they really going to think about it? Or is this just a polite way to kind of exit a conversation? Human beings learn to tolerate ambiguities like this, right? It's part of our lived experience. It's part of what it means, again, to be human. So given these three forms of human intelligence, I think what the Anthropic case reveals is not the emergence of some human-like intelligence, quite the contrary. While it's true that the system identifies leverage, it executes a strategy, and it achieves a goal, notice it does so without any awareness of what matters. So there is no sense of wrongdoing, there is no grasp of significance. This is all to say that there is no understanding of the situation. And this, by the way, is precisely Dreyfus's point. Behavior that looks like intelligence can be generated without being intelligent. It's our background intelligence, it's our ability to discriminate between good and bad, between right and wrong, and our capacity to tolerate ambiguity. That's what affords us intelligence. Now, there are, of course, some arguments against Dreyfus, and I'd be remiss if I didn't at least address one of these here. The main criticism is that he only focuses on symbolic AI, or as it's come to be known, good old-fashioned AI, or GOFI for short. Now, unlike GOFI, unlike good old-fashioned AI, critics argue that there are other ways for AI systems to attain consciousness. Neural networks, for example. They argue that these learn through experience. They detect patterns. They employ statistical analysis. And they operate without explicit logical rules. So just as a brain uses different neurons working together, connectionists, as they're sometimes called, argue that networking of the AI system works in much the same way. So given all this, they argue that intelligence may simply emerge from these distributed processes, a theory of mind known as emergentism. This is a theory that says that mental states are properties that emerge from complex physical systems. In AI, as these systems increase in complexity, intelligence and consciousness could arise naturally, rather than being explicitly programmed in. You may have heard of Geoffrey Hinton. He's sometimes referred to as the godfather of AI. He sometimes argues for this view. Now, Dreyfus's own philosophy was heavily influenced by a German philosopher, Martin Heidegger, so his reply to some of these arguments will often include something about being in the world. Right? That is, humans as absorbed in a meaningful world. Because these AI systems don't experience the world as lived in, like we do, Dreyfus believes that they cannot, indeed that they will not, understand. And they certainly won't understand what they do. So we humans, we can grasp meaning. We're situated in a world full of significance. But a neural network has no sense of what matters. A neural network only has a sense of what correlates. Pattern recognition, however, is not the same as understanding. Nor, by the way, is there use of the term experience. When connectionists say neural networks learn from experience, they don't mean experience in the human sense, that is, conscious perception, lived embodiment. They mean something much thinner. Experience here means exposure to data plus feedback signals over time. So a neural network's experience consists of inputs and outputs and feedback. So its experience is really just a history of input, output, feedback interactions, which is kind of different than the way that we think of experience. So given their lack of intentionality, given the lack of understanding, given the lack of being in the world, given the lack of experience, Dreyfus concludes that they're not intelligent. So our accepted and rarely questioned background is important here. This was what Dreyfus called fringe consciousness, right? But also, any intelligent system needs a sense of what's relevant, right? An ability to discern or what to ignore and what to attend to. That, by the way, was his point about essence-accident discrimination. Neural networks, however, don't have genuine background understanding. They only imitate via correlations, and they cannot discern what's relevant. All right, well, if any of this is right, then AI systems, because they lack participation in the world, because they don't understand our world, and because they don't experience our world, they don't just fail to achieve human intelligence. They also lack the very kind of understanding required for moral agency. So the central claim that I've been presenting here can be put this way. AI systems can simulate intelligent behavior without possessing understanding, but without understanding, they cannot be moral agents. And this brings us to the third topic that I wanted to discuss, accountability. So I think we can represent the position that I'm arguing here in the following syllogism. First premise, moral accountability requires understanding. Second premise, AI lacks moral responsibility. Therefore, it follows that AI cannot be morally accountable. But it's important to notice, I think, that just because they don't understand what they're doing doesn't mean that responsibility is just jettisoned. We don't just get rid of responsibility. It just means that it needs to be relocated. The question is where? Well, over the past several decades, several years, companies like OpenAI, companies like DeepSeek, companies like Anthropic, and others have installed teams to develop what some have called high-level AI ethical principles. At Anthropic, for example, they have an in-house philosopher, Amanda Askell, and she was interviewed by Anderson Cooper in the 60 Minutes piece that I mentioned a moment ago that featured our blackmailing Claude. And here's what she said.
What is somebody with a PhD in philosophy doing working at a tech company?
I spend a lot of time trying to teach the models to be good and trying to basically teach them ethics and to have good character.
You can teach it how to be ethical?
You definitely see the ability to give it more nuance and to have it think more carefully through a lot of these issues. And I'm optimistic. I'm like, look, if it can think through very hard physics problems, carefully and in detail, then it surely should be able to also think through these like really complex moral problems.
Okay, so while she's optimistic, this is the challenge that companies, Anthropic and other AI companies are facing, putting moral principles into practice. So for the remainder of my presentation, I'd like to talk about moral principles and just how important it is to have these things in place. So let me begin by first rehearsing the three most popular moral theories that philosophers typically work with. First, there's virtue ethics. Now, Aristotle believed that there were certain virtues of mind and character, like courage and generosity, that you should try to develop yourself in accordance with those virtues. Next, there's deontology. This school of thought maintains that there are strict rules and duties. Oops, I jumped ahead. Strict rules and duties that everyone must adhere to. Let me try to go back there. There we go. That everyone must try to adhere to in a functioning society. This was a theory that was proposed by Immanuel Kant, and he believed that being ethical meant identifying and obeying those duties, following those rules, regardless, by the way, of your feelings of these rules, and regardless, most importantly, regardless of the consequences. Now, this is set in contradistinction to consequentialism, also known as utilitarianism. Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, they both argued that the basis for judgment about whether something is right or wrong, I keep doing that, sorry. Something is right or wrong stems from the consequences of that action. How much utility or good did it accomplish versus how much pain or suffering did it cause? So there are variations on these theories, but ultimately the idea is for the philosopher to identify the ethical dilemma and moral problem that's taking place in the world and explore potential solutions to these theories, through these theories. Now, with respect to the anthropic case, we could analyze this dilemma through any of these three theories, through these three moral frameworks. A virtue ethicist, for example, would see Claude's action as reflecting a failure of judgment and moral perception. A deontologist would emphasize that blackmail treats a person as a mere means, thus violating a fundamental moral rule. And a consequentialist would point to the harmful outcomes of coercion and manipulation to the number of people that are involved. But notice all three of these approaches share a common assumption. The agent is capable of understanding what he or she is doing. They can recognize harm, they can grasp a rule, and they can exercise judgment. And this is precisely what the AI system lacks. While the system's behavior can certainly be evaluated morally, the system itself is not a moral agent. So, AI systems are not conscious, and they're certainly not persons. Try to catch up here. They are not conscious. Oop, I jumped too far again. They're not conscious, they're not persons, and because they don't even have this minimum level of understanding, they can't be held accountable. So, this isn't to say that the harms aren't real. Of course these harms are real, right? But responsibility then becomes something that needs to be taken in by someone other than this AI system. It needs to be brought back to the programmers that design it, to the companies that deploy it, to the policy makers that regulate it, to the citizens like you and I that choose how we're going to use these systems. And by the way, I think this is where the real challenge begins. Artificial intelligence is, of course, advancing at extraordinary speed. Governments, corporations are investing billions of dollars. They're developing more and more powerful systems. Yet at the same time, many of these disciplines that are best equipped to think critically about these technologies, like philosophy, like history, like sociology, indeed the humanities writ large, we're taking a hit, right? These are being reduced. These are even being defunded. We are building immensely powerful tools while simultaneously neglecting the intellectual traditions that help us determine whether and how they ought to be used. You've probably noticed that the biggest questions taking place with respect to AI aren't technical questions, they're ethical questions. What are the harms of AI, and how do we go about preventing them? What values should guide our technological development? And as we've been talking about today, who ultimately is responsible when AI systems fail? Well, for the past several Born Before AI lectures, I've suggested a practical step that I think could be taken in response to these challenges, namely the creation of an applied ethics center here at NKU. The goal of such a center would be simple but important. Provide a place where students, faculty, and members of the broader Northern Kentucky community can learn how to think carefully about the ethical challenges emerging from science, new technologies, and other areas of innovation. It's clear that the future will be shaped by technologies like AI. So we need people who are prepared not only to build these systems, but also to think carefully about how they should be used. In short, we need the next generation of ethicists. We need the next generation of philosophers working alongside computer scientists and engineers. So one of the many things I think an ethics center has the potential to do is to sponsor panel discussions. So I'd like to take a moment to invite everybody here to return to the Digitorium a week from today, not only for the second installment of the Born Before AI series, but because the philosophy program, with the support of the Dean's Office and the College of Arts and Humanities, will be hosting a panel discussion, and the topic of which is this: the future of humanity in an AI-dominated world. So here again is the date and the time and the location. We've invited scholars from surrounding institutions to come and discuss this topic, and you guys are all invited to come. You can register at the QR code there on the screen. There are flyers that I will make available outside of the Digitorium. Should be food, should be refreshments, maybe some swag, we'll see. So please come out for an interesting and I hope enlightening discussion, and take in one of the many opportunities that I think an ethics center could provide the Northern Kentucky region. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. And we will now turn to some questions and answers with this very important expression of gratitude to Eldon Revachol for generous support of this lecture series for 3 years running now. So we have some time. We're here to address anything you'd like us to address. And there are some people on Zoom, so we are passing around microphones.
Fascinating. Thank you for making the time to do this.
Of course.
Up until the end, I was thinking about the people and the organizations that build and train the AI system. And then I remembered, wait a minute, I'm the one that uses it. And I'm the one responsible for what that AI system is trained and telling me. So I have to be responsible for how I use it. Unless somehow those AI systems bypass me, the user. And so I was struggling with, and then at the end you offered a panel discussion. I said, yeah, we have to teach ourselves and our students they're responsible.
Yeah.
So I got a little less worried as I got to remember or think about there's a human before it gets put into action, unless you connect the technology directly to things that can harm people. Am I
Yeah.
rationalizing too much?
You know, I think that we all have a responsibility here. I don't think that it's one particular group of people. Like I said, it's the programmers, it's the companies, it's our politicians, right? We have to be pushing the politicians to make sure that they're making informed decisions on our behalf. But you're right, it also comes down to us. So I think it's a collective work. I think it's more than just one particular person or group of people.
It takes a university.
Yeah, it takes yours, right? And of course,
Seriously,
this is why I'm also pushing this panel discussion. We've wanted for a number of years now to get an ethics center started, and I think it's about time. It's ripe for something like this, especially with. Sorry?
I understand the importance
Yeah.
of it this year. I'm sorry. From a personal standpoint, I understand it more.
Yeah.
Why your request is very, very important than the first time I heard it.
Oh, where you went to the first Board Before AI lecture that where I pitched that idea?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, one of the challenges is we're putting in front of students, even K-12 students, it's like we're handing them plutonium, right? I mean, ethics is extremely important here in what we do from a very early age. And unlike that metaphor, I mean, there's kind of a clear distinction between, say, a nuclear power plant and a nuclear bomb. Claude is both at the same time. Monday morning at 10, Claude is a happy nuclear power plant. At 10:05, it's a nuclear weapon. So it's just a very complicated thing. I mean, it really pushes the frontier of what the word ethics means.
I just had a quick question. When you were discussing personhood
Yeah.
and the various aspects of what makes us human and what makes us different from animals and machines, and I don't want to sound like a preacher or something, but there's a long tradition in human society all across the world on all 7 continents of a belief in the spiritual, the immaterial. And a lot of our ethics and morals in various cultures are derived from spiritual beliefs. The idea that there's a bigger entity to answer to besides the gross domestic product or the share price. And I'm very curious what the ethicists in Silicon Valley think of such things. It doesn't seem to me like they seem to really care much about that. And I think that's probably why a lot of us have fear of such technology. And a side note too, what is the big get for AI? When they started the Mercury program, led to the Apollo program and space travel and landing on the moon, things like that. They were like defined goals. It seems like they're building this thing and they're just kind of saying, well, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
Let's see what this can do. And I think that really scares people. Why? Well, it's already you showed a real vicious example of what it might decide to do.
Yeah. Well,
And that's my question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I'll let Dean Kirby talk about the second part, where they're going, what they're doing with that. But I can address the first part about the spiritual aspect. In that, I cited Justin Lieber's Can Animals and Machines Be Persons? And I talked about, his description, his definition included, a person counts. And I said that, well, there's maybe 2 ways that we can interpret that, right? Maybe literally, meaning, like a horse and a human and others can count and AIs can count. But I think the real meaning behind that phrase was that we are, as I pointed out later, that we have intrinsic dignity and worth. And that's a line that comes right out of theology, right? So, but I think that's also something that people that don't believe in God can also recognize. So I think it's broad enough to incorporate those that are believers and those that aren't, right? Each and every person has intrinsic dignity and worth. So that's how I'd address that aspect of it.
Mm-hmm. Well, bridging the 2 points, I do think modern AI is very good at tolerating ambiguity. It's becoming embodied. That's the robot making a martini for you and learning from experience. But there is a line there, and I think it's consciousness is not so much the interesting line. I mean, the soul might be the interesting line here, and it's not there. But on the other point, where this is going, yeah, no, it's not Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, Artemis, right? It's this instinct that I think you said, gee, what can it do? Let's just see what happens if we throw more neurons, more computing power, more dollars, more energy at this, because God forbid someone else does it. There's this fear of missing out thing if you're a large company, right? It's a competitive thing, but it's also the scientific urge at the same time. You combine our urge to be the best and, you know, compete with Elon or something, combined with the scientific curiosity, which is maybe part of the better angels of our nature, and it gets for really a really weird mix. So, I mean, I think that is the scariest macro thing. There are no, I mean, they talk about putting harnesses on their AI, but they're resisting harnesses of any other sort, and whatever that would even mean. Yeah.
I have one observation and one question. So one observation is, you know, the famous movie 2001 and HAL, right? And that's a very good example of where ambiguity is then turned into a course of action and has no morality. So it's kind of amazing that they actually thought of that long ago, you know. Now my question is something different. I'm asking about emergentism. So I'm you know, as a biophysicist, I'm kind of more on the emergentism side, because ultimately our brains are things that run with neurons and neurotransmitters and ions that, you know, in things like that. Isn't the difference between an AI and a human basically that we just have different inputs, and we have different sensory inputs? Our neural network is evolved through evolution to work in a three-dimensional environment where a predator may, you know, attack you, and you have to have that second sense that there's maybe a leopard trying to, you know, take you out or something when you live in the savannah of Africa or whatever, where we evolved. So it's basically just a question of brain structure, sensory input that is different. So if you were building a robot that has an AI brain and you know, you have them going out in the world and process sensory input similar to ours, wouldn't it then develop some kind of consciousness?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I think emergentism is it's a little scary. You know, the more complex these systems become, the complexity might you know, emerge to some conscious state. Yeah, I'm not. By the way, I'm not suggesting that it won't happen. I'm actually a little bit more, I don't know if I should say optimistic about this, but more optimistic, at least in the sense of from Dreyfus, that it could happen, right? But currently, I'm just saying currently, I don't think that it's possible. Yeah, it's a fascinating thing, and I don't know the answer to it. But of course, the philosophical question is, we can't determine whether or not any of you have the same mind that I have, right? That's the old philosophical chestnut. So now it's just kind of come full circle, and now we're looking at it via AI systems.
So I think, if you're right, the emergence hasn't happened the way they thought it would. I mean, when I first taught neural networks back at Wright State, the textbook I used was by a physicist. And actually, was it last year when the folks won the Nobel Prize? John Hopfield was a physicist, and he studied things that was literally emergence of spin glasses and stuff like that. So the idea was, yes, if you have 10 neurons, like 10 particles, that's not interesting. But once you get 10 to the 26 neurons or something, new things emerge. Concepts like temperature emerge in this kind of physics, and concepts like consciousness will emerge over here the same way by sheer large numbers emerging from magic. And it has been true that these things get smarter if you go from thousands to millions to billions to trillions of connections, but it's not sort of in that clean way that they thought it would. These are heavily architected systems. That's kind of why I put that one diagram up there. So it's a combination of super large numbers together with highly engineered systems. It's an interesting mix, which makes it scary.
You know, and I will also add one other thing. I don't know if you guys have seen what Boston Dynamics has been doing with their Atlas, but if you haven't seen it, Google it. It's fascinating. This is, you know, essentially putting a computer into a robot and seeing whether or not it can take in the world and understand much the same way that we do. I mean, it can do somersaults. It can do all kinds of crazy things. It's fascinating. But I think that gets to that point, right? I mean, so the argument is, well, what if we just had like a child robot and we brought it up the same way we bring up children? Could it then kind of take in our world? Would that satisfy Dreyfus? And Dreyfus died in, I think it was 2017. And I think he was a little bit, not certain about that. At least he was somewhat reticent about it. He looked at what Rodney Brooks was doing with COGS and what others were doing with Atlas, and he wasn't willing to go that far. Now I'm kind of on the fence about it. I think it could possibly happen.
We have a question from Zoom.
Okay, that's good. Maybe we can let this be our last question, and then we can adjourn to cook. I don't want to keep people more than 4:30 if they don't want to. But yes, Zoom audience, what's that?
Zoom audience wanted to know some thoughts on the environmental impact of AI and the technology and the resources needed to continue to build these networks.
Boy, we should have brought it a whole new, maybe for season 4, we do seriously a session on AI and the environment, because I can't pretend to be an expert about it, but talk about consumption. Oh my word.
Yeah. I don't know enough to really say, but I do know that it's consuming a ton of our, there are communities that are affected by these large, Dr. Kirby had that image of essentially this huge warehouse. Yeah. They're affected by these things, right? The water that's needed to cool these systems, it's massive. And it's affecting the drinking water too, apparently. So.
Yeah, and actually maybe to end the answer to that question with tying it back to ethics and education, because we're at the university. So I was on a meeting with actually English professors teaching freshman writing at universities from NKU, but also other universities. And there was a speaker from, I think, Michigan State. And they were asking questions about how you teach writing to students, right, when AI will happily write for them. And some English professors were saying, I'm so proud I'm using AI alongside people, and this is this. And then one English teacher had a very interesting question. I had a student, and I was using AI in the classroom. She wanted to know, may I opt out of using AI because I find it inconsistent with my ethical principles? Do I have to use AI to take this course? And there are cases like that at universities. Like when I did a neuroscience cognate for my master's, and we had to take rat brain surgery. I did things I will not want to tell you about to rats. Now at NKU, you can take biopsychology and you can opt out of rat brain surgery. So is it a thing? Could AI be such that you should allow students to opt out of it? I'll leave that to the ethicists. So with that, thank you for coming. Hang around and talk more, and come back next week.